She was my biggest mistake, the Alpha King declared. But by morning, his Luna was gone without a trace. A true story. There are things people say in the middle of a crowd when the music is loud and the moment feels too comfortable. Things they say without thinking. Things they say that they can never take back, no matter how hard they try. This is a story about one of those things. And about the woman who heard every word. Zara had been part of the Alpha King's household for almost 2 years. She did not ask for the life she was given. The bond between them was not something either of them chose with their minds. It simply happened, the way these things do in their world. And she was brought to the great stone palace in the highlands and introduced as the Luna before she had even fully understood what that title meant for her life. She was a quiet person by nature. Not shy, exactly. More like someone who had learned very early that the room goes better when you take up less space. She had grown up that way, always the one who adjusted, who waited, who made things easier for everyone else without being asked. She carried that habit into the palace, and it fit so neatly into the silence that Riven left around her that she barely noticed she was doing it all over again. Riven was the Alpha King, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, the kind of man who walked into a room and the room rearranged itself around him without his having to say a word. He was not cruel in an obvious way. He never raised his voice at her. He never said anything sharp to her face, at least not until the night everything changed. He was simply elsewhere, present in body, meaning he slept in the same palace, sat at the same table, walked the same halls. But emotionally he was somewhere she could not reach, and after the first few months, she stopped trying to find the door. What Zara did instead was keep the household running. She learned the rhythms of the place without being taught them. She noticed which pack members were struggling before they said anything. She handled small disputes before they became Riven's problem. She remembered the names of people's children. She made sure the older members of the pack felt seen at gatherings where it was easy to feel invisible. She did all of this quietly, without credit, without anyone asking her to. She did it because she was the Luna, and it was right. And also because keeping busy meant she thought less about the hollow ache of living beside someone who seemed to forget she was there the moment she left the room. Through all of that, she kept a small pressed flower on the windowsill, a pale yellow one she had picked the day she arrived, before she knew anything about what her life here was going to look like. She dried it carefully and placed it where the morning light could reach it. It was the only thing in that room that was completely, without question, hers. The night everything fell apart was the night of Riven's coronation anniversary. Every year the pack celebrated it with long tables and low lanterns, and music that bounced off the stone walls and made the hall feel warm even in winter. Zara wore a dress she had adjusted herself, because she never asked Riven to arrange things for her. She stood near the tall windows at the edge of the hall, watching the crowd, feeling the specific loneliness of being surrounded by happy people and not quite being able to reach any of it. Riven was across the room. He was relaxed in a way she rarely saw him. Laughing, easy, a drink in his hand. His oldest friend Calyx beside him saying something close to his ear. Calyx had made it quietly clear over the years that she thought herself a better match for Riven. Not in words, never directly. In the way she moved around him. In the way she looked at Zara when Riven was not watching. Small things. Zara had let all of them go, because letting things go was something she had a great deal of practice at. Zara had been walking toward her husband that evening. Not to say anything important, just to stand beside him at his own celebration. That seemed like a reasonable thing to want. She was close enough to hear clearly when Calyx leaned in and said something too low for Zara to catch, and Riven turned his head and looked across the room toward her. He looked at her the way you look at something unremarkable. Then he looked back at Calyx, laughed, and said, "She was my biggest mistake. Whatever brought her to me got it wrong. I think about that more than I should." The music kept going. No one gasped. A few people nearby shifted. Someone looked at the floor. Someone else glanced at Zara for just a second and then looked away very quickly. Zara stopped walking. She stood still for a moment. Then she looked down at her drink, set it on the nearest table, and smoothed the front of her dress once. She walked to the door of the hall. She did not look back to see if Riven noticed her leaving. He did not. She went back to their room. The palace was quieter up there, the sound of the celebration below, something soft and far away. She did not sit down and cry. She had spent the better part of a year working very hard not to cry over this marriage, and it had become a kind of habit. Instead, She stood in the middle of the room and thought about everything clearly, maybe for the first time. She thought about the dinner she had cooked 3 months ago. He had sat down, looked at his plate, and spent 45 minutes reading through reports without once looking up at her or acknowledging she was sitting across from him. She had eaten, cleared the table, and he had thanked her on his way out the door, absently, the way you thank someone for passing the salt. She thought about the one time she had tried to ask him something personal, about his father, who had died before she came into his life. She asked carefully, leaving him every way out she could think of. He gave her a look, not mean, just completely closed, like a door that was never going to open. She nodded and changed the subject, and never tried that direction again. She thought about the letter she had written 6 months ago and never sent. 2 in the morning, when she could not sleep, which was often. She had written him everything honestly. Not an accusation, just the truth. That she wanted to know him. That she was willing to be patient. That she just needed him to give her one small thing to be patient for. She folded it and put it in the back of a drawer, and told herself she would send it when the moment felt right. The moment never came. The letter stayed where she put it. She made the decision she had been circling for a long time. She packed with a calm that surprised her. She left the dresses. She left everything the palace had given her. She took her journal, the photograph of her mother, one change of clothes, and the pressed flower from the windowsill. She wrapped it carefully in a piece of cloth. In every way that mattered to her, it was the most important thing in the room. She shifted at the eastern tree line, where the dark was thick, and she ran, without looking back once. Riven woke the next morning with no urgency. It was Aldrich, his second, who stopped him in the hallway before breakfast, and told him, with a careful expression, that the Luna's room was empty, and her scent ended at the eastern tree line. Riven's first reaction, and he has since said this out loud with the kind of honesty that costs him something, was annoyance. He assumed she had needed air and taken more of it than usual. He assumed she would be back by evening. He sent no one after her that morning. What changed things was going to her room himself that afternoon. The wardrobe full of dresses, still hanging in a neat row, every gift, every fine thing, all of it there, untouched. And the windowsill completely empty. She had taken the flower. That detail hit him in a way he could not explain. He had looked at that windowsill dozens of times without seeing it, but she had wrapped that small pale flower and taken it with her in the dark, out of everything else she was leaving behind. It told him what the flower meant to her, and it told him, very quietly, what everything else in that room did not mean. He started asking questions. He spoke to the people who had been standing nearby during the celebration. Each conversation was harder than the last. He learned exactly where she had been when he said what he said. He learned what her face had done in the second before she collected herself. Aldrich told him plainly, in the way Aldrich always told him things when he had decided the king needed the full truth, that Zara had never complained to anyone on the staff. Not once in 2 years. Not about the loneliness. Not about feeling unseen. Not about anything. That is not a woman who was fine, Aldrich said. That is a woman who stopped expecting things to change. 3 days later, Riven found the letter in the drawer. Her handwriting. 2 in the morning, 6 months ago. Writing about wanting to know him. About being patient. About just needing something small to hold on to. The letter was not angry. It was hopeful. It had been hopeful once, and then she had put it in a drawer, and at some point, the hope had simply run out, and she had left, without ever saying any of it to his face. He sat with that letter for a long time. The palace went quiet around him, the way it always did in the evening, and for the first time he could remember, the quiet felt like something was wrong inside it. He went to find her himself. He told no one. He left before dawn, and spent 3 weeks moving through neutral territory, asking careful questions, following small threads. He found her because she had pressed another flower into the bark of a border tree. He is sure she left it for herself rather than for him, a quiet marker that said she had passed through and was still moving. She was working at a village healer's cottage at the far edge of Packlands. She had shown up and offered to help, and the old healer had said yes. She had been there 3 weeks, and already knew where everything was, and who needed what, and why. Riven stood outside the cottage door long enough that the healer's cat came to look at him, and left again. Then he knocked. Zara opened the door. She looked at him. Her face did something complicated and then went calm. She started to close the door. He put his hand on the frame, not pushing, just stopping it. He said her name, and his voice cracked on the second syllable in a way he could not get back. She did not close it the rest of the way. He said, "I am not here to bring you back or ask you to forgive me tonight. I came because you deserve to have the person who was wrong stand in front of you and say it clearly. I was wrong. What I said was not true. You heard it because you were walking toward me, and I have to live with that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, simply and without anger, "What was I even walking toward you for?" He said, "I think you were just trying to stand beside your husband, and I was not worth the walk." She studied his face, the way someone does when they have spent a long time learning to read people carefully. Then she opened the door a little wider, not all the way. Enough. She told him what the 2 years had cost her. She was honest and direct, and did not soften anything. She told him about the dinner, and the look he gave her, and the letter she wrote at 2 in the morning, and the drawer she kept it in. She told him she was not the person who had left the palace, and had no intention of going back to being her. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not explain himself. He just listened, for the first time in 2 years, the way he should have been listening all along. When she finished, she said, "You have until the next full moon. If you want to show me something different, show me. But just showing up is not enough. That is only the beginning." He stayed nearby. He helped at the cottage without making it about himself. He came when she wanted to talk, and left her alone when she needed that. He slipped into old habits twice, caught himself both times, and corrected without waiting to be told. She noticed that, the catching and correcting without excuses, small things. But in her experience, the small things are where the truth of a person lives. On the night of the full moon, she told him she would come back. Not for the pack or the bond, or what she was supposed to be. For the version of him that had walked 3 weeks through unfamiliar territory alone, just to say he was sorry. She said, "That is the only version I want to try with. The moment he is gone, I am gone too. And next time there will be no flower on the tree." He said, "That is the only version I want to be anymore." They walked back together. She set conditions before entering the palace, and he agreed to all of them without negotiating. The pack gathered at the gates. Zara walked through without a speech and without a performance. She walked the way a woman walks when she has already decided who she is, and stopped asking anyone to confirm it. That was not the woman who had slipped away in the dark 6 weeks before. That was someone who had gone out into the cold and found her voice there, and brought it home with her. Riven walked beside her, not in front, not behind, beside. Months later, Zara was in the small garden off the kitchen in the early evening, writing in her journal. Riven came out with 2 cups of tea, set one beside her without a word, and started to go back inside. She said, without looking up, "Stay." He sat down. Neither of them spoke. The light came through the leaves, and the tea stayed warm in their hands, and for the first time in 2 years, the silence between them was not empty. It was full. And anyone who has ever sat in that kind of silence with another person knows that is the whole difference.